Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton agenda Awani secara langsung dari studio Awani Bukit Kewangan, Kuala Lumpur. Dan saya, kalau anda pergi ke garis masa, akan sentiasa menggunakan pengangkutan awam. Saya sendiri balik kerja pada tengah malam pun, walau di agenda Awani akan terus mengambil pengangkutan awam. Tapi soalnya mungkin ada beberapa perkara yang sering saya letakkan di garis masa, seperti kualiti, security, integrasi dan sebagainya. Namun malam ni saya nak tengok kerangka yang lebih besar, kerana itulah yang semua kita mahukan dan sempena sambutan 57 tahun kita merdeka, tak berapa hari saja lagi. Saya nak melihat ini juga sebagai satu penghayatan kepada kemerdekaan, kerana tahun ini kita tahu temanya adalah tentang cinta dan segalanya bermula di sini. Dan kalau kita mahu kehidupan dan kualiti hidup yang lebih baik, maka kita harus pastikan pengangkutan awam darat terutamanya itu menjadi sesuatu yang lumrah dan bukan yang alternatif, kerana ia akan menjadi lebih baik bagi semua orang. Tapi itu senang nak dibicarakan, tapi nak melaksanakannya, antara institusi yang kerap dilihat adalah Suruhanjaya Pengangkutan Awam Darat. Dan malam ini saya nak mengenalkan tamu saya. It's always ladies first on this show. So, Saudari Nur Fanim Muhammad Amin, Timbalan Pengurus Besar Bahagian Polisi Perancangan dan Penyelidikan SPAD. Tapi yang pentingnya, sebelah Saudari Nur Fanim adalah bos nombor 1 ataupun Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif SPAD, iaitu Saudara Muhammad Nur Ismail Kamal. Terima kasih kerana datang pada malam ini ke agenda Awani. Intro saya begitu kerana bagi saya cabaran untuk pengangkutan awam darat itu, antara KPI yang saya lihat dalam Pelan Transformasi, dalam rancangan Malaysia setiap 5 tahun dan sebagainya, adalah tentunya ada KPI nombor. Dan antara KPI nombor itu adalah waktu berpuncak pagi itu, kalau lebih 40% ke 50% orang naik, maka itulah capaian prestasi. Tapi itu nombor. Untuk perkara itu berlaku, maka rakyat dan pengguna itu sendiri perlu memilih untuk menjadikan pengangkutan awam darat itu sebagai mod ataupun cara mereka bergerak, mobility setiap hari. Dalam konteks itu, saya nak bagi peluang pada saudara Muhammad Nur Ismail Kamal dalam konteks ini. Jika SPAD boleh bermula kosong, dan kita tahu itu bukan hakikatnya, SPAD perlu bergerak di atas banyak perkara yang telah pun ada. Tetapi kita tahu contoh di seluruh dunia, contohnya di Curitiba, Brazil dan juga di Toyama, Jepun. Pembangunan yang meletakkan pengangkutan awam itu sebagai sesuatu yang berada di tengah ataupun berorientasikan pengangkutan awam semakin dijadikan suatu realiti. Jadi mungkin saya nak bagi peluang, selama ini orang bawa masalah ke SPAD, saya nak bagi SPAD menyampaikan pandangan SPAD apa sebenarnya yang menghalang kita untuk transformasi dengan lebih baik dalam bidang ini.
Okay, terima kasih. Itu satu soalan yang sangat-sangat besar. Bagaimanapun, biar saya mulakan dengan betapa pentingnya transformasi pengangkutan awam darat di dalam agenda pembangunan negara kita. Because as you know, based on World Bank findings and all that, the trip demands for the country will just grow tremendously with the growth of GDP annually. And as we strive towards becoming a high-income country, demand for trips, for meetings, going to work, going shopping, going out to lunch, further away because we have more money now. So this is just going to grow exponentially. So we're going from a period where there are 6 million people in Klang Valley right now to 10 million in 2020. So we're talking about a growth of trip demands from 40 million daily on average in 2010 to 140 million in 2030. So 3-4 times growth within the next 20 years. So how do we create the supply necessary to cater for the future demand? And like you said before, how do we make public transport the choice of mode, the choice of transport?
Tapi mungkin data semakin menunjukkan ada peningkatan itu. Transformasi dalam konteks itu, saya sendiri sudah melihat faktanya di atas kertas. Saya melihat faktanya apabila saya menaiki pengangkutan awam. Memang semakin ramai yang memilih untuk menaiki. Tapi adakah data itu menunjukkan itu cukup untuk menuju ke arah yang kita mahukan? Kerana kita tahu, kita tak boleh lihat ramai pada waktu tertentu. Jangan waktu tertentu aja ramai, waktu lain tak ada langsung dan sebagainya. Bagaimana tentang jumlah kenderaan persendirian misalnya? Adakah itu turut berkurangan? Semua ini saya rasa bahagian yang mengkaji dan melihat data, mungkin boleh tolong kongsikan dengan kita apa capaian kita setakat ini dan apa lagi yang perlu kita baiki.
Dari segi data, memang kita lihat ada peningkatan lah di Greater KL. Data penggunaan pengangkutan awam meningkat daripada 600,000 last year to 800,000 this year. But then kita ada satu conflicting numbers that is menjadikan satu kekangan bagi kita punya transformasi agenda tu. It's the number of the private vehicles is actually meningkat. The registration of new cars, new private vehicles every year is about between 500,000 to 600,000.
50,000 setiap bulan lebih kurang.
So it's like we are going up, but there's ada yang melawan arus. So that's the big challenge for us.
Itu nombor plat pendaftaran kereta tu kena ada. Saudara Mak Nur Ismail duduk lama di luar negara. Di luar negara benda ni orang tak bincang sangat dah kerana ramai, terutama majoriti yang menerima bahawa lumrahnya memang kena pengangkutan awam. Tapi di Malaysia, apakah yang akan membantu tipping point ataupun pergerakan ke situ, kerana kalau kita tak memikirkan semuanya yang kita nak bangunkan, memikirkan tentang pengangkutan darat ataupun pengangkutan awam dalam konteks itu, maka tentunya tak jadi. Kalau kerajaan atau pihak berkuasa tempatan buat jalan pun, tapi kalau pembangun hartanah dan pembina bangunan, pencakar langit dan sebagainya tidak memperuntukkan dan mengintegrasikan keperluan itu sejak awal, maka kita nak membetulkan kemudian itu susah dan kosnya lebih tinggi. Jadi pandangan tentang perkara itu.
Memang betul pandangan itu. One of the factors, it takes time to build public transport infrastructure. And many cities in the world have done it early on, like Hong Kong, London. But we've started late. LRT kita cuma became online in the 90s, early 2000s.
Dengan 3 sistem berbeza.
Yes. And then nothing happened for a long time until 2010, 2009. And the important thing is that when you wake up, once you wake up, you can do things. So it's not too late for us. The government is putting a lot of money, putting public transport transformation as a key agenda, and that is our main motivation.
Saya perlu bagi rehat yang pertama. Apabila kembali, saya nak pinjam pandangan luas saudara Muhammad Nur. Cuma kerana beliau melihat pada nombor dan ekonomi ni lama. So saya nak ambil pengalaman lama sebelum SPAD pun. Kerana ramai yang mengatakan bahawa pengangkutan awam ni tak ada maknanya boleh menjadi industri yang membawa keuntungan. Kita mesti kena subsidi je. Tapi negara semakin menuju ke arah pengurangan subsidi. Dalam konteks makro tu, bagaimana kita nak mendekati isu itu dan polisinya, tetapi tidak bermakna kalaupun ia tak boleh membawa keuntungan berlipat ganda, sekurang-kurangnya tak payahlah 100% perlu disubsidikan. Masih ada ruang yang kita boleh masukkan. Misalnya, apa pendekatan yang bagi SPAD sekarang paling baik menuju ke depan dalam konteks ini, kerana bukan saja kita nak jaringkan di Lembah Kelang atau Greater Klang Valley, tapi kita nak jaringkan semuanya, even malah di luar bandar. Itu kita fikirkan selepas ini. Anda masih menonton Agenda Awani. Kerana saya nak cepatkan sikit, I would like to go into English now. Because I would like to tap into the wealth of experience. You know, you've worked overseas, you've worked in economic and finance, and a lot of people say the main issue that plague public transportation when we discuss it is the fact that it cannot be commercially viable. Hence, you've got to pump a lot of public money into the space. One, I want your input on that because you look at that macro and micro. Secondly, how do we link that to the fact that it's always as if it's a second thought and consideration. You plan everything else, then you look at how people move about. But shouldn't that be integrated in the very first place? Like people question, why is there no rail in Putrajaya? Isn't it a no-brainer that we should have rail? For example, and now we're talking about Penang. Penang developed without rail, and now they just cannot build any more highways because it's too dense. So how do you look at that if you can merge economic considerations and also planning from the onset?
Well, towards developing a first world public transport network, funding is definitely a big challenge. But before that, we had an institutional challenge.
Okay.
Before SPAD was created, no single organization is supposed to create a vision for everybody to follow, which created this gap, this vacuum where there's no promoter of public transport.
Okay.
Now we are created, we are about 4 years old, and we are stepping into that role.
Okay.
And we have started working with all the states. We have set up a technical committee headed by the state secretaries, director of the UPAN and all that. And it's starting to happen. But again, the challenge with public transport is ridership, because it involves a lot of fixed costs. You need a high amount of ridership in order to make it feasible, make it sustainable.
That's why, is it the thinking that it shouldn't just be, as long as you're going to work this mammoth physical infrastructure that's going to be literally in front of our eyes with a huge amount of money. I think the moment 40 and 50 billion was mentioned for MRT, people were like, wow, that's one of the biggest ever. But why should it just be for public transportation? Why can't it be linked to lifestyle, the quality of life of the people? I'm sure a lot of people, town planners, urban planners, says and look at it as, if you build the network of rail, for example, to congregation of places where people frequent, like a farmer's market or whatever it is, then it reminds me of LRT when I go to Dawangi station. You go only for Dawangi if you want to go on the train, nothing else, for example. But if it's Pasar Seni, then there's a hive of activity that you have. So it has to be an integrated approach. It can't just be an infrastructure for public transport only, and when we're not using public transport, it's just there not being used.
That is one of our main emphasis. When we talk about creating a major infrastructure corridor like MRT, and even for future high-speed rail, it's about building transit-oriented development around it, around the stations, creating hubs of activities, lifestyle, so that people want to be there and live there, work there, play around there. And but that is something that we need to work with local authorities on.
So that's
because
still
the planning is a different function.
Is that still a challenge? I'm just going to push you on this because it's a non-secret.
But it's turning around. It's turning around in the sense that if you look at KL, for example, KL had drafted their KL City plan quite a long time ago.
Yes.
When we came into the picture, the level of cooperation and collaboration started to move in a new dimension. So they've even revised the KL City plan and incorporated MRT and all our transit zones into it.
Funny, how do you factor in people's wishes into this? Because that must come as input into the bigger planning. For example, if I take Kampung Baru, for the longest time we have debates and issues how to develop it. But like it or not, you're going to have an MRT station, correct me if I'm wrong, right underneath Kampung Baru, and surely that will transform the socio-economic makeup of the whole area. Because right now, among the first group to take advantage are the developers. Like everywhere I go, real estate is moving up because they say this is closest to the MRT station, which is going to be here. So how can we empower through data, through information, through knowledge, and through asking for it, community to take advantage of where the hubs of public transportation will be?
I think in our approach, stakeholders engagement is one of the key elements that we undertake. So for every projects, like for MRT, for the bus transformation, the local community must have a say. So like for example, when we're doing the network rationalization for the stage buses, we have a session with the local councils, and they will call the local people to come in. Like we have one specifically for Seremban as an example. So they actually come and tell us, okay, we don't want this route, we want this, you know. So we try to accommodate, and we have that session with them. So so I think the way we're doing it, we're covering not just the political agenda in the sense of transformation and all that, but we actually go down to the roots. And we talk to the people on the ground, so that's how we're imputing it.
Let me also add,
Sure.
if you look at
like what you said earlier about actually private developers are actually taking advantage of building properties surround transit hubs like MRT, LRT and all that. We are coming with the idea that some of this upside should be attributed to the government to defray the cost of the infrastructure. So even when I was planning for MRT Line 2, we're looking at where big parcels of land that belong to the government can be redeveloped, regenerated into bustling new transit-oriented development. And some of this upside will then be used to repay the bonds that were raised to fund the MRT.
Okay. I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, seems it's a bit more complicated than just putting the infrastructure for people to move from one place to the other, because of course the same entity might have to look at commercial and market-based interests around the platforms or around the sites where this infrastructure is going to be. And all that at the same time, who are we building this for? Most of it is for the future generation, because it's not built for now. This takes years to come, like the high-speed rail network and stuff. So for the next generation, sustainability, green is also in. If public transportation is seen as arcade, old, and not contributing to the new mobile lifestyle of green sustainability, for example, that's not going to be in. So how do we use innovation, creativity to prepare and to make ready all this new value add that we must have, not as a luxury to have? That we'll discuss after this break. I know a lot of Gen Y because they work with me in Awani. You know, more than 50% of Awani staff, they are Gen Y. Zol, in Kini Trending is ready with Gen Y. After this, I'm going to ask you, Zol, why are you not taking public transportation? Over to you, Zol.
Public transport during my school uni days. Tapi kita nak tengok bagaimana reaksi di media sosial, kerana di media sosial ramai yang memberikan reaksi-reaksi yang dikatakan satu pandangan yang tipikal kerana memberikan pandangan yang negatif pasal public transport. Tapi ramai juga yang mula memberikan mesej-mesej yang positif di media sosial dengan pengalaman mereka menggunakan pengangkutan awam. Itu yang kita dapat kumpulkan dalam segmen kali ini. Kita tengok VT ini.
Pengurusan masa masih menjadi masalah utama bagi kenderaan awam di negara kita sejak dari dulu lagi. Itu yang diluahkan Osman Zulkifli. Ada juga yang turut menyalahkan kenderaan awam kerana lambat ke destinasi yang ingin dituju mereka. Amirul pula dengan nada menyindir mengatakan tambang taksi di Malaysia sebenarnya lagi mahal berbanding membawa kenderaan sendiri. Jauh sekali boleh berjimat seperti yang diwar-warkan. Ada juga yang turut mengecam Rapid Penang kerana pemandunya yang kurang sopan, perkhidmatan sistem penghawa dingin yang rosak dan sebagainya. Dalam pada itu, ramai yang memuji perkhidmatan Rapid yang laju dan menepati masa. Raja Amirah pula berpendapat kenderaan awam yang banyak di Malaysia memudahkan sesiapa saja untuk ke mana-mana tanpa perlu risau tiada kenderaan.
Dan ramai juga mahu diyakinkan mengenai masa depan mereka dengan menggunakan pengangkutan awam, dan mereka juga harap projek-projek berskala besar dapat dipercepat. Bukan dapat dipercepatkan saja, tapi mereka dapat untuk ada pengalaman untuk menaikinya nanti. Dan itu antara pandangan di media sosial cakap mengenai pengangkutan awam darat khususnya di Malaysia, dan ada juga komen-komen di Sabah Sarawak.
Soalan saya masih lagi sama. Kenapa Zul beli kereta baru berjenama Jerman tapi tak nak naik pengangkutan awam?
Bukan tak nak naik, tapi mungkin dengan aturan masa, kerja shift itu sebagai alasan.
Okay.
Tapi masih lagi kerana ada beberapa kekangan daripada segi jarak, door to door punya perjalanan, satu perkara, dan juga mungkin dari aspek mungkin kata keselesaan dan sebagainya.
Pasal saya sayang Zul ni, saya tak nak bagi sebab-sebab lain yang dia tak sebut di sini, but I'll continue to discuss it. Thank you so much, Zul. I guess that's the challenge. These last few minutes that we have. He is a great example of a Gen Y that refused, I say refused, because he spent his extra income to buy a new car, a German-made car, instead of investing that maybe to facilitate using public transport. So how do we convince? One of the ways, like the question I asked, maybe if we promise green sustainability and mobility, maybe that's the way to go.
That is all and nice, but the fact remains, our network is not yet there. It's not ready. That's what we're trying to do. We're building trunk radial lines into Kuala Lumpur from places like Sungai Buloh, Kajang. We're building north-south MRT line. We're building Circle line. We're improving KTM. Not quite there yet. We're trying to lift it up to a 5-minute interval headway, metro standard, to serve the people. But all this takes time.
How many percent would you say? Okay, I guess the younger generation, they are fair. If you give them hope and you're honest about it and you say that we're not there yet now, but by next year we're going to have maybe 40%, and then where do you see us now, and by what time do you think it'll be? Of course, it's not 100%, but maybe even at 50%, it's going to be nearly good enough for them to see the difference.
Well, we have to solve the first mile, last mile, in addition to the network that we built. And right now, economically, it's just not feasible for private operators to undertake it. So we're building that through stage bus transformation and creating feeder services. But all this takes money.
So let's take subsidies away from hydrocarbons, petrol, and shift it into public transportation.
That is part of the problem, because there is no fund that is ring-fenced for public transport. Right now, everything is funded through bonds that are guaranteed by the central fund.
So you think that should change?
That
is that your wish list for PM's budget? Before we leave the show,
that would help us go a long way in terms of proper planning, knowing where to invest, where to build, by when. Then we can plan properly.
Thank you so much, Saudara Muhammad Nur. Saudari Nofani, don't think you can get away. Saya akan beri satu episod khas untuk kita tengok data saja dan kita bincangkan. Anda hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri, kerana saya rasa Yang Amat Berhormat Perdana Menteri masih menerima jika ada idea-idea tentang apa yang patut masuk dalam belanjawan ataupun bajet negara. Dan itulah saja yang kita ada pada malam ini. Jangan lupa buat turun aplikasi Mudah Alih iOS dan Android supaya anda boleh memberi cadangan dan menonton episod seperti Agenda Awani ini secara langsung di gadget Mudah Alih anda. Sekian, selamat malam, terima kasih. Jumpa anda dalam Pengangkutan Awam.